delighted to have you here for this very interesting conversation about Togo. I should say that I grew up in places like Benin as a diplomatic kid and used to go to Togo, so I do have a sense of the potential of this amazing country, and also obviously at IRI we have a very abiding sense of what has gone wrong in Togo for a long time as a result of one family rule, which I guess is even stricter than one party rule, right? It was exactly 51 years ago this month that Mr. Eyadema seized power in a coup. Coups happened a lot back then in Africa, as you know. They don't, this sort of monopoly of power, of course, when we look at Africa today, doesn't happen very much anymore. So I think it's worth reflecting on how much has changed in Africa and in West Africa, in Togo's immediate neighborhood. We've seen lots of democratic gains. We have, however, in the neighborhood and broadly in the world, also seen that democratic progress is reversible, right? So just because one makes the transition does not mean that it sticks. And we've seen lots of fallback recently in a number of countries. Obviously, whether we're talking about a country further afield, like Cambodia or Turkey, whether we're talking about countries closer to home in Africa, like Burundi and Gabon, but we've seen the logic of power, which is that autocratic regimes do whatever they can to stay in power, and even after democratic transitions, often countries have trouble consolidating. So we know Togo's not there yet, but we're very grateful to our friends here who are going to speak with you for everything that they have done to try to create a more open and free Togo. I think this is really an example. Civic activist work, the political opposition work in Togo, really reflects the modern world, and the fact that in the modern world, one man, one family, one party rule is not how you are modern. The way you are modern does not simply relate to what kind of phone you have, right? Or what kind of car you drive, or anything else. It relates very much to what kind of society you live in and how you are governed. And of course, we know Africa, including Togo, is going through this extraordinary demographic transition where most Africans will be young, a lot younger than me. And young Africans in particular, including young Togolese, we know, don't want to live in a country that's ruled in a way that medieval Europe was ruled 500 years ago, right? I mean, I think part of being modern today is being free to choose, including to have political choice. And these are not culturally specific values. We know there was a time when people said, oh, you can only have democracy in the West. It's really a European and American construct. And of course, we know from the last 30 years that that is just not true. We've seen democratic success stories all over the world, in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, even in the Middle East, right? In wider Europe. So we know that there's nothing culturally specific about autocracy. We know there's nothing culturally specific about democracy. And this is what gives me great hope, despite the fact that you are still looking at a very tough one-party regime in Togo that does not want to let go. So I think we can be long-term optimists, even if we know the short-term here is very difficult and there are so many challenges. So I'd just like to welcome our colleagues here from Togo, and really look forward to hearing from them. This includes Farida Nabourema, director of the Togolese Civic League, a prolific social activist and blogger who's done just terrific work raising awareness of the situation in Togo, abroad as well as at home. The 2018 Advocate of the Year and African Youth of the Year awardee. Congratulations. Very impressive. Wolali Ahlijah, who works with key figures in the diaspora to engage and organize democratic change in Togo. Welcome to you. And Kango Lare Lantone, former member of the transitional parliament that was in place from 91 to 3 when there was this opening and period of hope. A governance specialist focused on human rights, electoral, and legislative reform. Welcome. Delighted to have you here. You know, at IRI, we work in almost 100 countries all over the world. using this whole toolkit of democracy and democratic change, right? Whether it's digital and technology platforms, whether it's working with youth, whether it's working with women, working with political parties, working with civic actors. The toolkit always looks a little different. But I must say, we have found particular dividends from engaging with youth, engaging with women, and understanding that democracy is not simply about what kind of government institutions, what kind of electoral accountability and mechanisms you have. It's very much about the relationship between state and society. And those civic actors are as important, sometimes more important, often more important than the state in determining the quality of an open society. So we're in a government town here in Washington. IRI is an NGO, and I think we should always just remember that democracy requires a very engaged and active civic sector outside of government to work. And key representatives of that civic sector in Togo are here with us today, and I hope they will give us a bit of hope for the future. Could I also just welcome Tammy Longaberger from our board, who has a deep background and interest in Africa. We're delighted to have you. So I'm going to stop and look forward to this. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Dan, for the introduction. And welcome, everyone, to this important event on Togo, a country that unfortunately is not being mentioned enough in the recent news, but only for tragic events that happened there. I'm not going to spend too much time describing what the situation is and what the past months have been, because I believe Kango here would give a short presentation about the background and why we reached that point today. I'm just going to let you know how this event is going to be run. Each of the panelists here will have a short individual presentation on specific items and elements that they want to talk about and highlight. And then I will ask them some questions, and after that we will open to the floor for your questions as well. So I don't know which one of you wants to start, but feel free to go ahead.
Okay. Quickly, if you are not somebody who is which follows the events in Togo on a daily basis, it might not always be easy to understand what is the pull and pushes that are at work, and what the opposition or what the population is asking for. So I'm just going to give to reference some dates, and then from there kind of bring that together so you understand why those dates are important, and what are the implications, or what are the consequences, or what are the links of those dates with what is going on now. Okay, 1956, this will be August. The Republic of Togo is proclaimed. So Togo is a republic. Togo is not a monarchy. Very important. Now, when we look at that, I will go to 1991 with the National Conference, and the National Conference adopted institutions. The National Conference was a gathering, the most representative gathering that we ever had in Togo. So it reflects all the populations, all the sectors of the populations, all the various sensitivities, cultural differences, people who participated were representing really. That's the first time Togolese were put together in a place to discuss matters pertaining to Togo. So at the end of that conference, a constitution was drafted by there was a constitution commission that drafted the constitution, and that was debated in the transition parliament. And so that is what is called now the 1992 Constitution. So you hear people saying, 1992 Constitution, because, first of all, in terms of legitimacy, that is the document that came out of the National Conference. Okay. I note that in July 1999, Eyadema said he committed himself that he will leave power in 2003 at the end of his term. Okay, all that is history now. On October 2002, they had anticipated elections. So they call elections, and the current, the Adema's son, For Nyasingbe, was elected to parliament. Now, it is important to understand the system we have, unlike here where when somebody leaves parliament or leaves the house or leaves the Senate, you go to the state. Either the governor appoints somebody or they organize elections, new elections to choose somebody. In Togo, what we have is that two people are elected for the same seat. So you have somebody who occupies the seat. Should that person be promoted, go into the executive branch, then the second person takes his place. Okay. But once you leave that, you leave because there is an incompatibility between being a member of the executive and being a member of the legislative branch. So Ford Nyasingbe was elected. And also, it is the same 2002 that the parliament modified the Article 59 to get rid of the terms limit. Okay. Then we go to February 2005. February 5th of February 2005, Adema is declared dead, and his sons concocted a strategy to go to the army and tell them that their father has left a testament. And the testament, and so they went, and now a normal army, the way a normal army functions, when you have an information of that gravity, the top brass would retire at the Joint Chief of Staff or something equivalent, and then review what the matters are and so on and so forth. But in any case, in this case, it was something in that was done there, and then they started saluting for 4. Okay, so it is important to keep in mind 4 has left now because he has been appointed into government by his father. Now, that when he was appointed into government, he no longer has a seat in parliament. So he cannot, he was no longer in parliament. Okay. So February 6th, there have been changes made to the constitution so that he has been appointed president. February 25th, because of the resistance of the Togolese people and also the support and received from the international community, he was forced to resign. And so that we'll have elections, proper elections. So these are just few dates. So to kind of set the background for you, and so that will allow you to understand what are the things at stake now.
Presentation. That's Wolali.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kango, for this introduction. And I think that sets the stage to where we are now. We are now in a deep political crisis. And in a country like Togo that are used to being in perpetual crisis, what makes this particular time so special, and why should we pay attention to it? In 2005, after Faure and his bands forcefully seized power in Togo, there were an area of condemnation across the region and across the world. And a lot of goodwill people decided to partner with Togo and help us bridge that gap, move from that transitional phase into a new era. And Faure gave his word to many of our partners in the region, in Africa, and at the international level, who partner to broker a comprehensive political agreement with the major figure of the Togolese opposition and the civil society. And Faure it specifically stated that FOR should conduct a set of reforms to lead into a fair sharing of power and also recreate the optimum conditions for a real democracy in Togo. And that was his word, that was his signature, that was the agreement. 2018, we are now, fast forward 12 years, and he has yet to deliver on this promise. And it's not for lack of trying from the Togolese people, but he has certainly shown enough bad faith in terms of stalling the process and not delivering on his promises and not really leading the country in a way that brings true democracy in Togo. We have to mention that this struggle is not a struggle of the political parties of Togo. It's the struggle of the people of Togo. And the people of Togo have a voice in this. And the people of Togo have never accepted FOR as a legitimate president. So even with the outfit of legality and the political compromise that actually allow him to be at the helm of the country for some time, the people of Togo has always said FOR must go. And FOR has to go because he is part of the very problem that we are trying to solve. Now, how he needs to go is what we're trying to figure out. Should he go through a coup? We certainly don't believe that's how it should happen. Should he go through violence? We certainly don't want that to happen. Should he go through pressure from the people and from our partners? I think that's the way to go. And that's why we are here today. And there are some things that are a high stake here. And I'm going to briefly say that in 5 points. The first point is that 50 years is simply just too much. More than half a century of rule is just not acceptable by any criteria. If we go by all the human development indicator and we look at a country that's only about 58 years old, 1960 to currently about 58 years old. So that means that everything in the country is the result of their governance. And we can directly tie that to them. We have the international crisis of African migrants, and people don't leave regions that are stable and that are promising. And regimes like FOR's in West Africa are a direct contributor to how our youth and how our people are living across the Mediterranean and drowning. Helping get rid of those old-style leadership that are no longer relevant for any purpose in a post-Cold War era is critical for the people of Africa, especially the people of Togo and the sub-region of West Africa, to live in peace and find prosperity. There is the risk of stability for Togo itself, because the Togolese people have been very, very patient with this regime. They have they rose up, they have pushed, they have gone anywhere in the world, and promise after promises have been made, and after 50 years, the risk of escalation is now real. We have small, very, very small voices that are saying, well, let's push harder, let's push more violently. And you have the vast majority of the people of the Togolese opposition that are saying, no, let's engineer a way out of this that is clean. But how long is that stance going to be supported if we don't have our partners on our side? We also have ACME and the terrorists in the region at our door. Burkina Faso have seen a terrorist attack. Niger has seen one. Mali has seen one. Cote d'Ivoire has seen one. And what is really saying is that the region itself is unstable. FOR remaining in power is likely to disenfranchise our youth and make those possible because Togo is not a strong state. Togo is a very weak state, and the leaders are not leading the country. They are not really in power. They have seized the power for their own personal gain. So the stability of Togo, strengthening democracy and freedom is the key to shield the region from extremism. And now, as American here, we have a real interest in seeing stable regions around the world. So basically, those are the 5 reasons why we should really pay attention to what's going on in Togo now, and we should all partner to find solutions that are relevant, that are meaningful, and that really not just help the people of Togo, but all the people who share the same values of freedom, democracy, justice, and the rule of law.
Thank you, Wolali. And Farida, if you can add some thoughts to that.
All right, thank you. I think I'm going to talk about why the civil resistance we have in Togo right now matters, what we want as the Togolese civil opposition, and what are the limitations to this civil movement. First of all, in terms of why it matters, is that, as Wolali has pointed it out earlier, there are different ways for people to seize power. They can come through elections, they can come through a rebellion or guerrilla warfare, and they can also come through a coup. And in Togo, the people have clearly chosen to come through a civil resistance. This movement, this matters for so many reasons. We have been asked questions like, this guy was elected, he's supposed to be an illegitimate and illegal president. Why don't you just wait till the end of his tenure in 2020 before you ask him to go? But there are key things that we need to understand, that elections in Togo are a very suicidal attempt, because we have had elections in the past that got hundreds of people killed. You need to understand that in Togo, the state institutions are completely hijacked. We have a highly politicized army. We have a country where the Minister of Security is a military in the army who wears party uniform to attend the Congress of the party. And then we have the Supreme Court that is also instrumentalized. You have the President of the Supreme Court protesting in support of the President wearing party uniform. Then they have just created an independent Electoral Commission, they say, where we have members of the commission also wearing party uniform, attending party rallies in favor of the ruling government. So when you have a flawed electoral management system, you have a partisan judiciary system, a highly politicized army, a tooth-light human rights commission, and a punitive media regulation team, how do you expect to run clean, transparent, and fair elections? So they have tied the system at all levels to make it impossible for us to obtain change through elections. That is why the people have no other option than to be on the street today. So from there, I will talk about the limitations of the resistance movement in Togo. We have analyzed the different support that the civic movement gets in Togo vs the support that the Togolese government obtains. Right now, we have hundreds of thousands of people on the street, but it doesn't seem to be yielding any result. Why? Because we are fighting at the civil society on merit at different levels. We are fighting the government, we are fighting local and regional institutions, and we are fighting foreign governments too. Why? When you go to the ECOWAS, for example, I have been there and I have spoken to people, high-ranking officials there. They told me, well, you know, madam, you need to understand the chair of the commission is your president, and the chair of the president of the commission is his brother-in-law. There's not much we can do. But, you know, we support you. Keep it up. You know, good job. Then you go to the African Union and they say, well, we don't really have much funding. Maybe you need to contact, you know, foreign partners. But good luck. You're doing very well. You know, one day it shall happen. So basically, institutions are not on our side. Then from there you go, the foreign media. The foreign media doesn't really cover Togo. The Togolese people have been protesting for months now. They get very little coverage. But then you see the same thing happening in Iran, and everybody's sitting and saying, go Iran, go Iran. And then we're like, oh, we have been here too. We have noticed us. However, on the other side, you also have military support that the Togolese government is obtaining from countries like the United States. And I have a few listed benefits that the government of Togo obtains in terms of military partnership with the US. You have the International Military Education Training Program. You have the Africa Partnership Station, the Africa Maritime Law Enforcement Program, the Africa Endeavor, AFRICOM program, the Counterterrorism Fellowship Program, the Counter-Narcotics Terrorism Program, and the ACOTA regional exercises. These are different military support that the the U.S. government provides to Togo. Then on the other hand, what support does the U.S. government provide to the civil society in Togo? You have few organizations that obtain grants from the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy. You have the Peace Corps and you have IRI. Basically, that's it. In terms of civil society, we the Togolese have a total vacuum. There's no NDI in Togo, no IRI in Togo, no Article 19 in Togo, no Open Society in Togo. Basically, nobody is interested in Togo. So the civil society is doing everything by itself. Human rights institutions on the ground have no support whatsoever. Journalists on the ground have no support whatever unless they are reporting in support of the government. And how have we been surviving through little fundraisings within our communities? Today you are called that this journalist's life is under threat and you have to raise money to support him. Tomorrow you have one of our defenders who is arrested and you have to support him. It has been very tough. So we have here a civil society that is completely abandoned by local institutions, by foreign partners, by foreign governments, and a government that is using state funding on top of international relations and on top of international funding to fight and to crack down the protests in the country. So it's making it very hard for us. That is why we are here today to ask for support. And worst case scenario, if you cannot support us, then support them too, and at least we'll be a fairer game. So what do we want? We are calling for financial support to be cut for the Togolese government, especially the support that benefits the army. And from that, we want the Togolese governments to be removed from the U.S. peacekeeping missions. That is one of their most critical missions. That's what they love doing the most, serving at the UN, but they cannot be serving peacekeeping missions in other countries when they are brutalizing, abusing, and killing their own people on the ground. Beyond that, we want the Togolese media to be supported because we have grave human rights abuses going on the field, and these go underreported, and it's going to make it even harder for us to have a transitional justice in the future. And we also need support and capacity building for the Togolese civil society groups because the struggle is real. We have been working together, but we are mostly not qualified and trained to kind of like lead this kind of work in certain fields. So we need the capacity building, and we have seen that happen in other countries like Burkina Faso, in Senegal, and even the Gambia. And we need to provide legal support to our folks in prison. Right now, there are over 200 people who have been arrested by the government since the protests have started. Many have been denied legal support. They are in prison, and we have been begging for their release. We have the people from the Nubweke movement, such as Joseph Eza and Menset Kukodoko, who are arrested. There are other dual citizens of the US and Togo who are also arrested by like Mohamed Ndouaki. Some are killed, like Senam Bil Daku, and nothing has happened because there is no money available to support people who are victims of the abuse of the government. And last but not least, we also need to provide humanitarian support to Togolese refugees in Ghana who are living in extremely difficult conditions because there's basically no one to attend to them. So these are our expectations, and this is why we are here today to see how civil society groups in the US and even para-governmental groups in the US can help us kind of like straighten the things out in Togo, smooth things out, and help us in the struggle. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these brief introductions. I'm going to start my first question for Wolali. It's a very open question. As you mentioned, and as Dan mentioned, and you mentioned in your presentations, the regime has been in place for more than 50 years. There has been multiple instances of violence and unrest in the past decades, especially during election time. But this one is very specific and hasn't been that massive in the history of Togo, or maybe 25 years ago during the early 1990s era. How do you explain this extent of this unrest, the duration of this unrest that's been going on for 5 months now? What is the explanation for that? Why are people willing to go in the street and demonstrate weekly or daily in support of the opposition to demand change? Why is this happening now and not 2 years ago or 2 years from now?
I believe it's nothing new. The desire for freedom and democracy and justice within the heart of the Togolese people have never died, whether they are in Togo or they are living abroad. And effort has always been made to put pressure on the government namely for Gnassingbé to allow freedom to ring in Togo. Right now is special because it's the exacerbation of the patience of the Togolese people that ran out, and also the lack of commitment of our partners and the government of Togo. When you do have the UN closing their mission on human rights in Togo, implying that the conditions have improved enough to not make that a priority. When you do have partners that are not funding the civil society at the right level, and when you do have a political class, I'm talking about the political parties that have grown complacent, that's when the people rise and they take charge. And we have a new figure in the opposition, the name of Tikbi Achadam, that should be credited of waking up and reorganizing the movement and giving it a huge, huge vibrance. But it is not to be mistaken that this is the voice of the politician. This is the voice of the people of Togo. And a 50-year mark also seemed to resonate with a lot, because there seemed to be some people that were willing to give some kind of benefit to For Gnassingbé when he first came to power. There were some people that believed that there was some form of alternance that can happen through a U.S. educated leader. And that did not happen. And the disillusion over time have crystallized to form a unified movement, not just among the opposition, but even within members that were initially supportive of the government. And it's gaining momentum, it keeps growing, and the extent of the repression have shown that nowadays the Togolese people are no longer afraid of bullets. They are no longer afraid of militaries, and they are decided, and they have decided that 50 years is enough and that 4 must go.
Thank you very much for this answer. My second question would be for Farida. You've made very clear what is needed for Togo, for the civil society, more assistance, more pressure on the government, some sanctions and all that, and some democracy and governance assistance to civil society, to groups, to media, to journalists, and to human rights activists. But apart from that, which I think is very clear and absolutely necessary, what do you, as civil society activists, expect from the opposition, which is a political opposition with its own agenda? They've been demonstrating and calling for strikes and rallies in the streets of Togo and the different cities throughout the country for months now. What do you expect from them now, like for the future months or the future weeks, as part of civil society?
Right. First of all, I would like to also mention something. When the August 19 political repression occurred, it was the civil groups that put pressure on the opposition to come together and to form a coalition and start what is being done today. So it is not, the protests are not the single-handed action of the opposition, of the political parties. The civil society groups are also taking part of it. So I will say that our expectation as a whole from these leaders to remain true to the struggle. The people of Togo have made it clear that they don't want to settle for anything less than the departure of For Gnassingbé. People are not interested in arrangements that is going to elongate the tenure of For Gnassingbé. They have made it very clear and they remain adamant on that. So they need to stand on their ground and not allow the regime to manipulate them as they have managed to do in the past 3 decades into accepting something that in the long run is still going to benefit this regime. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this answer. My last question before opening up to the floor would be for Kango. You've mentioned the background and the historical background of the crisis. One thing that I think is important for people to remember and to know is one of the requests from the opposition parties is to amend the constitution to reintroduce term limit, which the law that was passed in the National Assembly in September, I believe, says will be now in the Constitution, but the tricky part is the opposition wanted to include another amendment to the Constitution saying that in no case shall anyone be allowed to have more than 2 terms. And this amendment was refused by the National Assembly Law Committee. And so the bill that is supposed to be going to a referendum will not include that specific section, allowing for Nassimbe to run for an additional 2 terms should this referendum be a yes in the end to amend the Constitution. So that being said, it seems that Faure is in full control of the situation. He has full control of the army. We haven't witnessed any defections of units joining the opposition. He has full control of the ruling party, which had a congress recently where top leadership positions were reappointed. The international pressure from the regional actors, from the African Union, from the ECOWAS, which, by the way, he's the chairman of for the next 6 months still, from international actors like France or the US and Germany, doesn't seem to make him willing to go to a dialogue, which, by the way, he has agreed on, supposedly. The national dialogue was mentioned back in November. We're still waiting for the format and the content of the dialogue. But regardless of that, he's still moving forward with its own agenda. The CENI, the Electoral Commission, has been tasked with preparing the upcoming legislative elections supposed to be held in July. The referendum is supposed to be held as well, because this is what he announced in his New Year's address. So it seems that nothing can make him change his course. He's doing what he wants to do, regardless of what's happening in the streets or what the international community reaction can be. How do you explain Faure's strength or the fact that he's in full control, that unlike Compaoré in Burkina Faso or Jammeh in Gambia recently, he actually manages to mitigate the situation against him and to keep control and the country under tight control? How do you explain that?
From my point of view, I don't think that he has full control. I think that's the image they're trying to project. But from within, they're worried. They're seriously worried. Because, you see, what we have is a movement versus institutional arrangements. What they have been good at is to set up institutional arrangements with the opposition in such a way that they can control the opposition. So with TP, what has happened is that it started a movement. So a movement that they have no control over. So part of their struggle, and even the geographical issues of is it on the beach side or is it at Decon, is it somewhere, all of that has to do with that. They are not, in control, really. But that's what they're projecting, Now, it is also important, I think, to understand the mental posture of Faure Gnassingbé. I don't think that Faure Gnassingbé, in his mind, he is there for another 2 terms. That much, I think, is true. That currently, in his mental, because there have been points at which people around him were worried, raised some issues and things like that. He doesn't seem he's totally impervious to that. Now, the issue here is what do we do? Because that is currently, he cannot govern that country. He can stay there for 200 years now, because the bond that links the people to their leader today has disappeared. So there is no attachment. There is no confidence, in the man and the system. So it is important to understand that he cannot. So the only thing that could happen is violence. And what we're trying to do is to avoid that type of violence, whether it's civil war, whether it's just brutally mowing down people. Those are the issues that, again, some of us that are speaking out, we're trying to avoid the country reaching that level. And maybe if we don't have others, join us and try to kind of insufflate some reason into that man, that may lead to a very, very problematic situation. Now, as far as the Constitution is concerned and the referendum, for them, the way they're looking at it is that if the referendum, people go to the referendum, they vote yes, then they have won. If they vote no, that means people are against the reforms, then they have won. So that is, their thinking on that's right, on organizing the referendum. So the referendum itself, nobody should go to that referendum. So that's the only option. That's the only option. It is important also to note that, look, we have decided, we the people of Togo, that no Togolese should have more than 2 terms. There's 7 million people. If you have taken one probability 101, you understand that, we have 1/7 million. That's a lot of people who can be head of state. So we cannot say 2 terms, whatever you have to do, whatever you have to contribute to the nation, you will have contributed. It's enough to go. So that's why that aspect of the provision in the 1992 Constitution is extremely important. It's extremely important, and this is not something that we are ready to give up on.
Thank you very much for this answer, Kango. Now we can open up the floor to questions from you. I will ask you to introduce yourself and mention your organization, if any, when you ask a question. We'll take 3 questions at a time, so they can answer multiple questions together. So feel free to raise your hand. Madame et Monsieur and Jeff, and then the man next to Jeff.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lili Ninevi. I'm a Togolese activist, and my question is go to Mr. Kango. I don't know how they are going to phrase the question for the referendum, because when they talk about referendum, I don't understand, because many times people are telling us, if you will say yes, it's still a problem. If you will say no, it's still a problem. That means maybe a lot of people don't understand even why we have to go to that referendum. You talk about it a little bit right now, but I want you to explain that more, so more people can understand what is in that text, why people are afraid of it, or why we shouldn't go to that referendum. That's my question. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Edward Bruce. I'm an activist too, political activist from Togo. I want just to go back a little bit. In 2002, Fonya Singbe was in the parliament. He was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the committee which changed the 1992 Constitution. So he is part of the problem. He changed the Constitution for himself. Now he became president. Term limit was banned. Now, we want the 1992 Constitution to be brought back. And he said no. So we just want, if the Togolese problem needs to be solved, we need to bring back the 1992 Constitution. He helped Ahlijah. We need to know that. He was the chairman that time. So he cannot be part of the problem and be part of the solution. He needs to go.
My name is Adote Akwe. I'm an activist. I've been, in 2005, the president of the Togolese League for Human Rights, and deeply involved in this struggle on the ground. And facing the trouble I faced, I was obliged to leave the country and come and settle here. The problem, I don't have a question, but a short contribution to this debate. The foundation of Faure Gnassingbé's power is the problem. He and the military came to that power through a coup, which is a crime in regard to our constitution and to all constitution in the whole world. Up till now, he is under that kind of condemnation. So I don't know, everybody has been playing that game. That's where people don't understand us. He has never been a legal president to Togo. So now when people say he is elected, he is this and that, that is not true. Today, if justice has been to be restored in Togo, that man needs to face justice. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I'm going to touch the issue of how international community react towards the people of Togo. I have to say it is a shame. Let us touch the issue of civil society and civil institution helping or assisting Togo. When in August this thing happened, we went around and we found that the National Democratic Institute, National Endowment for Democracy, Amnesty International, Freedom House, International Federation of Human Rights in France, they all have cut their support program from all civil society institutions in Togo. I asked them why. We couldn't have any answer. The only answer we could have might be, I don't support it, but it might be out of the lobbying of the Togolese government to make sure that the civil society in Togo doesn't have any support. That's a shame. Second thing, a civil society in America, when in 2005, we documented the killings of people. We reached the figure of 1,000 people killed. And when the United Nations stepped in, they confirmed at least half of it because their mission lasted only 2 weeks. They couldn't have gone into the deep of the territory to document all we have found, okay? And those who have disappeared, abducted, disappeared, we didn't talk about those things. Now, when we talk about 1,000 people or even half of them dying in a country, here, like here in America, you don't see anybody rallying to support us. But when we talk about lion or elephant killed in Africa, you will see people going on rally. So that's a paradox. We need to fix that. Lastly, when we talk about the struggle today in Togo, it's not a political party matter. 50 years, the people are saying it's enough. It's just because we don't have a leader. The leadership, when it happened, they don't talk about to the leaders of the civil society. When things like that happen, they call at the table for negotiation, they call politicians. But that should not have been the case. Normally, this issue, the dialogue should have been led by the society, civil society themselves, not the political, because when it comes to these, people think that one party wants to remove another party and seize power. This is a civil society issue, people issue. We need support. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Smith. I'm the director of Vanguard Africa, and we're so honored to be co-hosting this event today and to have the opportunity to spend so much time this week with the three activists on stage. My question has to do with the fact that the Togolese regime, we've seen more so recently, has been sort of adopting this language that civil society activists, those in the diaspora, including mentioning specifically some of you on the stage right now, labeling you as terrorists, as agents of regime change, and oftentimes worse. I wonder what's your response to that? How do you plan on addressing that moving forward? And wrapped into that, we've also seen government spokespeople and the president himself, using this argument of stability, that civil society, that critical journalists, that dissidents and critics alike are creating instability in the country, and using that as an argument to crack down, often violently, killing people in the streets as a rationale for doing that. So particularly to Farida, because I know you've been mentioned specifically by some government ministers as involved in some of this work. So I wanted to get your response to that. Thanks.
Thank you. Congo first, maybe for Madam's question.
Okay, yeah. Now, there are, on referendums or referenda, you have, let's say, the California-style proposition, this and that, which are technical issues. And on those, typically, people tend to express what they really care about. But on political referenda, which is one big, massive referendum, it's not clear that people are really answering the question that is in the referendum, as opposed to reacting to the people who are in power at that time. So a referendum, as a tool, is something, is tricky. Now, here, the thinking behind it, from the regime's point of view, is that, look, if you vote no at the referendum, that means the country doesn't need any reforms. Things are hunky-dory. So, now if you vote yes, is what they have written in the document that becomes the constitution. So in that sense, both ways, their analysis is that they are winning. So that's why, they're pushing that referendum with that document.
All right, I'll take on your question, Jeff, about the issue of the Togolese government labeling us as agitators and stuff like that. There's one very interesting thing about the government of Togo is that they have been unable to create jobs for the majority of the youth in Togo, but I myself have been so lucky. I've held so many positions. I've been a prostitute, a porn star, a terrorist. I wake up every day, I have a new job. But on a more serious note, we need to understand that this government has been trying to find an alliance around them because they know that they have no legitimacy in Togo, and they understand that international partners are also becoming skeptical about them. So they were like, okay, let us look at world politics. What is in trend right now? Terrorism. Americans love terrorism. So let us tell them that we have terrorism in Togo and they will give us money. Okay, so let us tell them that the reason why the protest started is because they don't like Israel and we like Israel. So we voted for Israel. So as a result, the Americans will support us. So they are trying to instrumentalize world politics right now to push their agenda. And they are trying to manipulate world leaders into believing that we have an ethno-religious conflict in Togo, when never in our history have we ever had any religious or ethnic conflict in Togo. So what they are selling to the American government through lobby firms they have hired is an attempt to kind of explain why they are needed in the region. Because Fonya Simbe knows that the trend is that in the whole region is we serve 2 times you go, because Togo is the only country that doesn't have term limits right now in the ECOWAS. But he needs to sell an agenda and say that, hey, I am very important. I am important because I'm fighting terrorism. Can't you see we have terrorism in Togo? Farida Nabourema is killing people. So we need to make sure we get rid of terrorists. So I need to stay here till I die to make sure that Togo doesn't fall under Boko Haram or ACME or even ISIS. So that's the agenda they're trying to push. And of course, it doesn't make sense. And I have also said that Togo will not fall apart if Fonya Simbe stopped leading this country. We had countries that were led by dictators like Burkina Faso. When Compaoré left, Burkina Faso is doing fine. fine. When Jammeh left, the Gambia is doing just fine. But when you look at other countries where dictators remained in power and had to be removed through rebellions and coups, like in the DRC, for example, there has been war there ever since. So do you want to hijack the future of Togo to support an illegitimate government that is not even able to meet the basic needs of their people? The answer is definitely no.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Some more questions from the assistants? Yes, ma'am. Go. Yeah. Just wait for the microphone, maybe.
My name is Marai Tushiminina, and I work in Cameroon for the Center for Human Rights and Democracy. Thank you so much to the panelists. It was very enlightening. I know, Farida, you've been doing an amazing job mobilizing the civil society. But the words that is coming up in my head is Togo has decided for Nsimenis to go, which is fine. So now we are 2 years from the elections, presidential elections. What are you, diaspora, and the people on the ground doing to have at least a leader ready to take over? Because if you guys don't start grooming the next leader now, you guys, of course, will go into a coup d'etat. The reason why I'm raising this issue, because that is what is going on in Cameroon right now. Elections in 2018, you have so many different fractions, but you don't have a leader that will take over after, the incumbent. So now there's a status quo. What do we do? Do we go with the secessionists? Do we go with a federal country, or do we, maintain the incumbent? So just to avoid that, I just wanted to make sure that you guys also have created a room to start, grooming the next leader that will take over, coming from the diaspora on the ground, instead of focusing much of the problem, because we all know the problem. We know who are the people fueling the problem and who are the people that will continue putting all their resources because they have vested interest in Togo. But now you have to look at 2 years from now. Who will lead us? Who will take over after there was a fall down or after that? So I don't know if you can answer that.
And over there.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the panelists and IRI for holding this discussion. Adjo Ajaka with NED. I'm also a young Togolese professional. And my question to the panelists, my thesis was on lessons prevention, conflict prevention, lessons learned from the Ivory Coast applied to Togo. And I think the speaker before me who had a specific question, those are my thoughts every day as we prepare for the elections coming up in Togo. What are your thoughts on getting global support for the government of Togo to implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report that was provided to the government to initiate first and foremost, I'm sorry if I'm going a little bit off from my question, but my beautiful country, there's a lot of healing that has to be done. And we also need a lot of unity among all Togolese. And at times we have to change ourselves before we really want critical change from the government, that we know there's so much that needs to be done. But on the ground level right now, moving forward to get global support when we know there's continuous, as various speakers have mentioned, Western continuous sponsorship to corrupt governments and dictators all over the world. What are your thoughts to get global support for the government to implement that? We know there's other issues such as the 92 referendum, but we have to focus so we don't get to an all-out if we could prevent, I always say proactive is better than reactive. So if we have the moment now to capture the moment, what are the solution? What is an appeal? For my thoughts as a young Togolese who knows my family is in Togo with so much suffering. The children are in despair. I mean, the hospital, healthcare, education, we have investors that also are ready to partner with Togo. But for me, what can
little agile do in Washington. And for me, it's number one, to unite my Togolese countrymen, brothers and sisters. We need unity. I know at times Togolese want to hide behind that, but I'm a Togolese by blood. I don't have to, don't look at the outside. I don't have to talk about my story, the blood that has been shed in my family. As a young professional at AU with no food in my stomach, aside from that, what are we as Togolese ready to do to unite, to come together for the future of Togo? And I think, I'm sorry, I derailed a little bit.
He has. Thank you. And
okay,
Mr.
thank you. My name is Kofi Abba. I'm from the civil society and the diaspora here. I'm here on behalf of SOS Togo, a new organization that has recently been very active in the United States here. This question here goes to Farida. I know that you've touched upon it already, but I think it would be very important that you elaborate furthermore on the issue of not just extremism, but I want you to explain, educate us a little bit about the specificity of the Muslim extremism, not just any kind of extremism, that is serving as the driving tool right now in the offense that the government has undertaken. When you take extremism and you add Muslim to it, I mean, so I want you to elaborate on that, because United States is very far away from Togo, and people who make decisions here, what do you have, or what kind of explanation can you give? Tikpi Salifu, that's a Muslim name. Farida, a Muslim name. Even if, like many of us may know, she does not practice that religion. But it can make sense to some people when they come here and say, look, Salifu, Muslim. Farida, Muslim. And they asking people, 4 must go, and they doing this. So I think my question is buried somewhere in there, but I hope you got what I was trying to say. Before I go, unity is happening right now in Togo and here. So anybody who's here who's not part of the movement, just talk to someone from Togo here. We are trying to imitate the 14 parties and civil society acting as one in Togo so beautifully for 5 months now, never seen before. So we're trying to imitate and do the same here. So Togo is, I will even say, Togo is united right now for peace, united for liberty. So join us. The movement is going on, and I can see victory around the corner.
Thank you. Very interesting questions. If I may just add on what you said, ma'am, the example of the Gambia shows us that having a united coalition, a united opposition behind one single flag bearer can make a difference. If you can just relate to what the question was about, what can the opposition do in terms of pushing someone forward that could speak on behalf of the whole coalition?
All right. Thank you for your questions, and I will take on Mirai's question first. When she mentioned the elections of 2020 and the need for the opposition to unite, that is something that we are very aware of, and I will have to say that the Togolese opposition is strongly united right now, as we have the strongest parties in the country together, despite all the pressure, that intimidation, the attempts to dismantle them, to corrupt them, they have remained unified on asking for change in Togo. But I also need to make certain things clear. There have been 2 occasions upon which the opposition in Togo came together and chose one candidate, and it didn't work. In 2003, when Eyadema, after he changed the constitution in December 2002, and he decided to run for a third term, the opposition came together and chose Boba Kitani as their flag bearer to go to the elections. It didn't work. In 2005, when Fonya Singbe took over in a coup, and then we had elections 2 months later, the same thing happened, and it still didn't work. People voted, militaries were sent to schools, they stole ballots, they beat people up, they killed them, and they proclaimed Fonya Singbe winner, and the ECOWAS came and said, oh, the elections, despite, few irregularities, everything was fine. And we are still dealing with that today. So I have given examples of how the electoral system in Togo is completely hijacked because the state institutions are manipulated to serve the purpose of one regime, which is why we are here today, because following the 2005 brutal elections, they went to Ouagadougou, they signed an agreement upon which the government agreed to operate certain reforms. Electoral reforms were included. And we know that in the current situation, there is no way we can win elections in Togo. It's like you're having a soccer game, and one team has 5 players, the second team has 11 players. Your goalkeeper is from the second team. The referee is from the second team. The cheerleaders is from the second team, and they want you to win. That's impossible. So we want elections in Togo. We can have elections with an electoral commission whose members are party leaders, with ministers of securities who are militaries and party members, with a Supreme Court leader who is a party member and attend protests. These are the changes and the reforms that the Togolese people have been protesting for and asking for, which eventually led to the protests we have on the streets today. So we are still working on that, and we want Fonya Singbe to go, whether it is today or tomorrow or in 1 year, but we know that there's no way we can have free and transparent elections as long as the regime still maintains total control of state institutions, the army, the judiciary, the parliamentary, and worst case, one thing we need to know, Togo hasn't held local elections since 1987. We are basically the one country in the world where mayors are appointed. It doesn't even make sense, but that happens in Togo. So in the current conditions, having a candidate, a flag bearer for the opposition, has not really been a problem for the Togolese opposition. They have done it before, and they are willing to do it again. We have been speaking to them, and they are still willing to do that in the future. But we need to make sure that the electoral system is balanced, is transparent before we can even talk about election. Then I will jump onto Mr. Abbas' question about Muslim extremism. When you look at the whole of West Africa, I'm going to take the ECOWAS by itself. Over 2/3 of the presidents in West Africa are Muslims. The president of the Gambia is Muslim, Senegal, Niger, Nigeria, Mali, they are all Muslims, Guinea. So it's actually the non-Muslims that are the minority in the West African region. It's not because the president of Nigeria is Muslim that he's a terrorist, or the president of Senegal is Muslim that he's a terrorist. And guess what? The Minister of Security, who has been behind the brutal repressions in Togo, Yak Demhan, is a Muslim. And so it is too easy to just put everybody in the same basket in the name of religion. That is actually unacceptable, and that is something the government is pushing for. They are trying to create a religious conflict by trying to tag Muslims and Muslim leaders as being terrorists. That rhetoric must not be given a chance to do that. We are lucky to have in Togo a pretty diverse community. About 20% are Muslim, they are minorities. 22% are Christians, minorities. The majority of the Togolese are animists. So we have always lived together. We have always been at peace with each other. This new thing has been created, and if we keep listening to them and promoting that agenda, repetition can turn the lie into a truth, and I don't want to give in to that. If somebody said that my name is Arabic as a result I'm a Muslim, then that's their problem, not mine. So thank you for that.
I would like to add something briefly, because I think it's important in this room to dispel the myth that we need a leader before we ask for a transition. When we have a proposition that is accepted worldwide, that someone can take the helms of the United States, being a community organizer with about 4 years of Senate experience, and can lead. When we have France that is being led by a a 40-year-old former investment banker. And those people did not come as a front runners. They actually got into the front because there is a political system that allows people to rise to the top. The position that there is a lack of leaders or a lack of competent leaders in Togo or in dictatorships in Africa is a false one, and that is one that is being peddled out in the West by African leaders to say that the inability of the opposition to be organized is a problem. Yes, it is a problem, and it is a serious one. But what else is a problem? When you do have 30 years without local election, you have a civil society that is not funded by our partners, not being taken seriously. You have a political climate that is rigged, and you don't allow the free expression of people and organizing and the element that build a real citizenry. Yes, of course, you are not going to see front runners. What we are asking is not for anyone to dissolve the political party of the president. We are saying four must go. We did not say UNIR cannot run Togo. If the Togolese people are going to the poll in a free and fair election and they choose freely their leaders, yes, we will applaud that. We just want the game to change. We just want political alternatives because we do need every Togolese to have a chance. You don't have to be named a Nyasingbe, or you don't have to be a son or a daughter of the former dictators to be able to run the country. That is really what we are fighting for. We are not fighting against one individual, we are fighting against a system. And we do want everyone to support us and help us, creating the condition for whomever do believe that they have a program, they have a vision, and they have the ability to lead that country, to pose that before the people and let the Togolese people decide. Togolese people have decided now that four will no longer, lead the country, and that is something that is not going to change. But Togolese also have decided that any Togolese that is competent should be given the opportunity to lead, and that's what we really need to happen now.
Yeah, before dealing with your questions on truth and reconciliation, I wanted to tell my sister from Cameroon, I understand what you're saying, and I think, political parties or people who really want to, even within the diaspora, think that they have what it takes to be president, should be preparing themselves. But from my end, I'm more concerned with institution building. It's not the individuals. The individuals are a problem when they have proven to be problems, like the one we were talking about, Nyasingbe Adema we were talking about. So we know they have a record. We know there are problems. But we need what the country needs. And I think, I will say that even in Cameroon, the way the country has been run, you need to have institutions be recentered, given their proper role and do what they're supposed to do. Not because, I think even in the West, and people are too comfortable with the strong man concept. They think that to rule Africa, you have to be a strong man. If you're not but it doesn't make sense. So I think we should work on institutions building, and we should work at the same time. Again, if you're going to be in that calendar, yes, it's important that the diaspora be preparing, a possible potential. People have the potential to be, but we should think about institutions. It would be sad if we manage to get rid of those who are creating problems, and then the people we replace them with carbon copies of the same people. Okay. The truth and reconciliation, this is what has happened. To be, to just be short about it. There haven't been any truth. Okay. That wasn't clear. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, let's go back 50 years, 60 years ago. The same Paul Biya, the same Mugabe, the same all of these leaders, they were actually even younger than us. So you see, like, they were like in their 20s. Yaya Jammeh, for example, he was like 29. So those were young people. They were had the same passion. And now look at where they led the countries. So by grooming a potential leader, it's someone also, when you bring him, he's also bringing with a frame of mind that I'm here to change the system. Because what the other did, they just, got elected. I mean, they took over power, but they also came with a personal agenda. They had the passion to begin with, but somewhere, somehow, it diverted. But now what we need, groom someone, a group of people that will grow together to build those institutions, and then you elect a leader from that. But listen to what Farida is saying. Basically, in a way, you are telling us that the solution for Togo now, it's either you guys going to revolution, like something similar to Burkina Faso. However, you need to know what happened behind the scene prior to that revolution in Burkina Faso. There was a lot of informal conversation, discussions between ECOWAS, AU, the leaders, the elders, the youth, but they chose to put the youth at the forefront. So that could be scenario number one. Then Togo also could be the case of Syria. So you have to look at all those scenarios and yourself position, where do we want if we don't want to wait for 2020? I just wish there's room for debate, but it's just things that in the pipeline, that in the diaspora and the people on the ground, what do we exactly want? Do we want a passive passage like at the Gambia? And how can we learn from the Gambia? Or we just go and disrupt the entire system, and people will have to lose, people will lose their lives there. So you have to create a room for that. You want for to go, fine, but you have to be ready to go for bloodshed.
Thank you.
And we are.
Yeah. I think we have time for 2 more questions, because we actually have to wrap up by 1:30. So whoever wants to, you had a question, ma'am, and
Yes,
maybe.
my name is Belinda. My name is Belinda. I have a question. This is for anyone in the panel. From your knowledge, what are the Western countries that are who benefits right now from for staying in power? We have a lot of, the French, I think, historical, we all know, although it might change. Now we're talking to the United States. We know Israel might have some interest. We know he's getting money from the German because the pirates to protect the sea and our coast. So to your knowledge, who are we going against? Who? And my second question is actually, the next one is, who have you been talking to beside I'll just say the United States today.
Well, my name is Pierre Clousset. Most of them in Togo call me Kwasi Clousset. I was at the national conference with Kango, a long-time activist, since actually 1992. I'm a human rights activist, but I'm a painter also. And my question is not really for the panel, it's for all of us here. And because I used to say action talk more than, whatever we can. It's time for action. And the feedback we're getting from Togo, the youth calling me at night, they're hungry, they want to do something, they want a leader, and that's the main thing. There is a revolution going on, for sure. So it can be a bloodshed revolution, but we want to stop that. I think Togolese are peaceful people. And the plan we come up with, I might say I'm leading here where La Quarantaine is a a nonprofit I came up with in 2005 when the kid made the first coup. And we rally here since then. We are trying now a plan. Most of the march in Togo right now are in Lome, going from, I might say, block to block and to the beach. Because everybody is afraid to go straight to the president and say, enough is enough. We want you to go. That's all we need. But that's why what the Togolese are saying. The kid, what they want is the president to just leave power. 4 months ago, that's what we want. So the plan we come up with is, why not go straight to the presidency and talk to the president? So I'm planning the next march to go straight to the president and give him a letter from the youth. Everybody as Togolese should write a letter to the president and tell him to go. And we want to go walk to the president and give him that letter. That's the plan. Now, everybody call me back and say, no, that's where the revolution might start from. They will shoot all those kids, and we say, no. It won't happen. Why? Because if we can, make that awareness come up from the whole world, if the whole world has eye on Togo, the day we are going to give that letter to the president, I think it might change, at least it might bring a change. Because I don't think we might put kid in front with letter in their hand, going to the president, giving that letter to the president. We will be on live, in Facebook, wherever, and then military might start shooting that day. Then it's gonna be the end. But that's the plan, and I need your help for that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, and it shows that there's unity, there's synergy, there's action on the ground. A lot of people sitting in the audience, a lot of people that are not here today that are following us live actually have contributed, and a lot of movement are happening. Just to take a segue into the question of Ms. Belinda, that there are similar movements in all European countries, and even in countries that we did not know Togolese were living there. As a result of the dictatorship of 50 years, we have scattered all over the world. But we have learned. We have learned democracy. We have learned the rule of law. We have learned peaceful protests. And we have learned what it takes to really build a country. And we are doing that. Who does benefit from being in power? I don't think anyone does benefit. But there is complacency. There is accommodation. There are links and interests that have established themselves. Who will benefit from leaving the power? I think that's really all the Western powers will benefit, because they are pouring money into patching problems that he have created. They are tolerating him. And we do understand that the situation is dire and it can change. A room for debate that I want to concede, that countries to move forward do need strong, prepared, well-educated, well-trained leaders. And I do believe Togo have that, and I do believe there is room for improvement. We were not going to wait until a single person emerged before we tell 4 to go. What we are here about today is about peaceful transfer of power. Peaceful. We want it to be peaceful. We don't want to grab the power. We don't want to overthrow any government, albeit illegitimate and inadequate. We do not want to overthrow, because we do not want to destabilize our own country. But we do want to insist that there ought to be a transfer of power back to the people, because the power belongs to the people. And we do believe that all the deficiencies that we have, maybe the lack of organization of the opposition, the lack of competency in some areas of leadership, all those, that's why we are sitting here today, asking for like-minded people in the international community to help us. Because with that help, we can overcome a lot. And it takes a coalition, not just a coalition of political parties, but a coalition of goodwill people. a coalition of people all over the world that share the same value and that condemn and refuse to accept what is totally and utterly unacceptable anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, who are we going against? You know, in the case of France, I mean, people always have networks. There are a lot of networks through which our head of states influence political power in France. But it is true that the current people who are in power now are not themselves the most friendliest to the regime. But, you know, France is diverse and they have very deep-rooted networks that have been doing bad things in Africa, and they will continue to do that until the Africans shut them down. Germany has a more interesting position because I think the Germans have been the people who have been the most disappointed that the reforms were not carried out. While they are working, you know, for the maritime security aspect of things, they are not basically they are not very excited about the regime. Now, the U.S. is an interesting case, as we know. You know, given that you can grab the attention of the current resident of the White House, Togo has been the only country, African country, that has voted for or against the resolution at the UN to condemn the U.S. President's declaration of Jerusalem as, and also the regime itself has been constructing a narrative to show that you know, they are with Israel and all of that. But I don't think that, I think we have a long tradition of relationship with Israel. It's true that after the Kippur War, I remember we had a Jeunesse Pionnière Agricole, which was, you know, an Israeli project after independence. So there is a long tradition. Yes, everything has been stopped with the war, the Yom Kippur War. But I think even for Israel, it's not in the interest of Israel to be couching their strategy, you know, on a regime that sooner or later will die anyways. It's better to have an intelligent policy and to really go with the people. So I really don't think that we are going against people as much. So what we need here is the people who are friendliest to us, to within the U.S. To kind of act to counteract an eventual, you know, I mean, coziness that the regime is trying to cultivate with the Trump administration.
Thank you. Maybe a last word before we wrap up.
All right. I think that I will talk a little bit about who we are talking to. We are trying to build support for the cause in Togo at all levels. We are looking at the civil society, not just in the US, but beyond. We have approached different civil society groups in the region, in Ghana, in Nigeria, in the Gambia, in Burkina Faso, in Senegal, and they have all been supporting in different ways the cause of the people of Togo, raising awareness, raising resources, pushing for support at different institutional levels. We are also talking to policymakers here in the United States, trying to give them a clearer perspective of the situation in Togo and to give them our side of the story, so they know they take into account our aspiration as a people and as young people before they make decisions when it comes to foreign policy towards Togo. We are as well talking to donors, grant donors, because as I have said before, the Togolese civil society isn't supported as it should. We are the one with one of the toughest regimes on the continent, but we are the one that are the least funded on the continent, and as a result, the regime find it easy to crush all civil movements. So if we have opposition party doing their side of the work, but the civil society is so weak that they are unable to support any credible democratic initiative, is going to void all the efforts that we have invested in so far. So these are basically the key figures and the key people that we have been talking to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very insightful and enlightening discussion. I hope everybody here in this audience today knows a lot more about Togo. I do. The message has been made very clear. I think we're all supportive of the efforts that you conduct here and in the field and among the diaspora to raise awareness about the situation in Togo and to push for change and for effective democratic change. So again, please join me to thank the panelists here today, and I hope to see you back again at IRI for future events.